So, hi everybody. Hi. My name is Dr. Hope Blecker. You can call me Hope. And I appreciate you coming and sharing your time tonight. I am going to take you on a little journey. And also our speaker, Dr. Peter Allen Chester, is going to also take you on a journey. Very, very different. So you're going to have 3 different experiences. One has to do with Curious George. One is a little bit that I'll share, and then he will share. I want to also respect that as you're listening to these stories, you may have some emotional responses, thoughts that come through your mind, something you want to doodle or take note of. So we do have little notebooks for you if you would like one. We do also have pencils. Nicely sharpened. You can pass them around. And after both of us are done,
Was one of yours sharpened?
it could be. After both of us are done, we do have the room next door that will have some canvases and some paint if you feel that you want to express more. The reason that I am saying that, and thank you very much, Les, for being so helpful in helping us get that, is the canvases that you create are going to be able to be put on exhibit at the Liberty Museum and Art Center. So there's a sign out there that has some more information about it from May 17th to June 9th. And also at the Sullivan County Historical Society Museum in Hurleyville for most of the month of September. And then after that, the canvases and the displays will go to the Government Center in Monticello. So as long as what you create can be on a canvas that can then be attached to the display, it can be a poem, it can be a short story, it can be a picture, something that you create. So that is why you have those little books to jot, and also if you have an idea, and then the room next door, we will create those canvases. My part of welcoming you here today is to acquaint you with the journey that saved Curious George. So there are the nice hardcover versions out there. How many of you know about Curious George in this way? All right, so this is the Curious George that I grew up with. Now it's also a TV show and a movie and all those other iterations. I found out about this book a few years ago, and this is the Curious George story of how the author and illustrator, Margaret and H.A. came to create Curious George. I won't tell you the whole thing, because after all, we are in a library. We want to encourage you to actually read the book or borrow the book, but I hope to tell you enough to pique your interest in what the connection is between Curious George, the story of the author and illustrator, their connection to World War II and the Holocaust and the escape, and then how you see their story and how it plays out when you read this book. So don't be embarrassed. After you read this book, if you want to check this out and make the connections, that's exactly what I did. So I would encourage you to also do the same thing. How this all ties together, and obviously this book came way after the Daffodil Project, is the Daffodil Project. So there's a big sign also back there. The Worldwide Daffodil Project is a project to plant 1.5 million yellow daffodils in commemoration of the children who perished in the Holocaust and subsequent genocides. So this is a worldwide project. In Liberty, we have planted 500. We did that at Creekside Park. In Livingston Manor, they have a garden of 250. That's outside Congregation of Agudas Achim. In Monticello, they are outside Landfield Avenue Synagogue. I'm not sure, I think about 250 were probably planted there. More will be planted this coming September in Parksville, and I believe also in Monticello. You don't have to be an organization to plant them. So the commitment you make is that you as a mom, a school, an organization, a business, that you will plant 250 yellow daffodils, and then you can pick a sign like this that's actually that big that you get with the daffodils, but it could be a community, a neighborhood that wants to plant them. And your commitment is you will plant them, and they are really symbolic of what? what does the yellow daffodil remind you of?
The yellow
Stars.
So they picked that on purpose. When the organizer developed the Worldwide Daffodil Project, he had found out that he had some family members who had perished in a concentration camp, and he said, I want to remember them, but I also want to do something that will blossom year after year. That is the sense of hope. That out of what their tragedy, we did not lose hope in the world, and we did not lose hope in the future. So that's the symbolism. A connection to liberty is, and I did not know this when I started the project, is Katz's Bakery. So the person who is the co-founder of the Worldwide Daffodil Project, David Feldman, is a cousin of the Katz's Bakery family in Liberty. So he actually came because of that connection when we were planting in Liberty, went to the Liberty Museum and Art Center and had this like little mini family reunion, which I thought was just such a nice outcome of doing this project. And another book, before we get into this, that I want to share with you is Mouse. So has anyone read this?
The one that's been condemned 100 times off the library.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you tried, who said they?
I did, I tried, but I didn't get through it.
So you don't get through it, Michelle, because you don't like graphic novel, or you just like it's not your.
I don't remember. I tried, it was a very long time ago.
Okay, so there's a Mouse 1 and a Mouse 2. Art Spiegelman, the author illustrator, is still alive. He did a talk about it being banned last year. You can see it on YouTube. But as I was prepping, I was rereading it, and this time the back cover caught my eye. So I'll pass this around. He has this, the map, and it has Poland and the concentration camp. It's overlaid with a smaller map of the Catskills. Because in his story, when his family moved to the United States and in New York, his father would bring him up here, and he talks about being in the Pines being at the Pines Hotel and driving up here. So I just thought it was so interesting that it just so in imagery showed the connection to Survivor and a Survivor story up here. I was going to enlarge a copy and have it available for us, but I did contact the publisher to make sure it was okay first, and I didn't have that permission yet, so maybe next time. But I just wanted to pass this around so that you could see that, because when people ask me why I'm doing this project, they said, well, there are no survivors up here. And I said, politely, that I disagree with that, because there are some survivors up here who I've come to speak with over the past few days, or the past few months, and also there are children of survivors, and there are grandchildren of survivors. And it's a story that needs to be shared and should come from the people who have lived it, rather than, at this point, come out of the history books, when we have people who can share it themselves. So, any questions so far before I dip into Curious George? All right, so what do you recall about this version of Curious George? What comes to mind if I say Curious George?
Mischief.
Mischief.
Margaret Mayberry, my third grade teacher.
Ah, there you go. Same name. Tough third grade teacher. I always think of the man with the yellow hat. I don't know why. To me, that's what comes to mind. So in this story, we're introduced right away to a yellow hat and the man with the yellow hat. Okay, that actually is connected to H.A. Ray. His name was changed. So his name was much, much longer than that. But here's a picture. We have Margaret and H.A. His name was actually changed because he had a name that was not easy when he immigrated to say and to spell and to pronounce. So his much longer name became Ray, but for a time he lived in Brazil. And he would wear a yellow hat to keep the sun out of his eyes. So when he wrote the story, George was originally a monkey named Fifi. He put that aspect of his life into what eventually became Curious George. He included monkeys because they were wild and in his life in Brazil. So he chose to write a story about them, and he made them mischievous because they actually tried, when he and Margaret were married, they tried to bring over the monkeys that they had when they lived in Brazil. And unfortunately, those monkeys passed away. They did not survive the journey, but they wanted to commemorate and remember the monkeys. So you'll see that he wrote about and made pictures of a monkey sleeping in the bed in a hotel. Because when he and his wife first moved here, their home was in a hotel. So I don't want to give away all the things, but you'll start to see, and they do visit a zoo, and they do have these adventures as Margaret and H.A. They spend a lot of time on their bicycle. And I picture in my mind a Curious George where he has this bicycle that broke and it's all twisted up. Margaret and H.A., in order to leave Paris and go to Lisbon, they needed to have some money. And at that point, they were riding their bicycles in order to escape. And they sold their bicycles in order to get money so that then they could get passage in order to get on a boat. And they eventually went from Lisbon to Rio and then from Rio to the United States. And what they did is they had the draft of the story about an animal and the draft of the pictures. And when they would go through the different checkpoints and people would say, what do you do? They said, well, we're just children's authors, we're illustrators. So that being what they perceived to the people through the checkpoints as, well, what harm are you going to do? You're children's authors and illustrators, is what actually saved them. Because people just didn't pay attention. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And it was eventually when they got here to the United States that they were encouraged to write the story. And eventually we have Curious George. And George was Fifi. And then they have an experience, and I don't want to give it away, but they have quite the adventure. They go to Lisbon. Eventually, they do wind up in the United States. And a few months later, and as the author of this book says, who did a lot of research, they don't know how they eventually got their luggage. It passed through so many places and so many people. But eventually they were connected with their luggage 9 months after they got here. Their luggage connected with them. It was the luggage that they had originally packed up in Paris. So when they were riding their bicycles, they had what was on their backs and what was in their baskets. No one knows who shipped it or how it was shipped. They lived for 23 years in New York City, modest lives, and they had a Cocker Spaniel. Then they connected with an author, and the adventures of Fifi were eventually retitled to Curious George. And they did various books, and they had a contract, and et cetera, et cetera. So Curious George was first published in 1941. And that eventually led to a whole bunch of other books. And in 1946, they decided to become US citizens, and they spent their time up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And H.A. Ray died in 1977, and his beloved Peggy, his wife Margaret, lived to 1996. And they never had children, and their story was passed down to different people. So they did, because partially maybe they were authors, they left a lot of notes and a lot of manuscripts, and I kind of laughed when I saw these pages, because it reminds me of the typewritten pages and carbon pages that I would have had, or still do, I'm sure. But it's just, to me, I didn't find out about this book until a few years ago. And then I did go back and read this to see all the things that they took and how they were able to share aspects of what saved their life into the story about a monkey and his adventures with the kite and his adventures with the bicycle, because that's a reflection of what happened in their life. So I hope you're interested enough to read, and teased you a little bit about that. And that led to this that I created. So my background is as a teacher, but I also feel sometimes the need to express things in different ways. As I was putting together this project, I couldn't get out of my mind Curious George Flies a Kite, and I was have a subscription to the paper version of the New York Times. It's just I need to read the paper and hold it, and just started cutting out words and I had a little basket of words that I wasn't quite sure what I was doing with these words, if anything, and then decided, let me find out if any come together. And this is from an ad from the New York Times, taking kind of like what Margaret and H.A. Ray did. here would be the house, this would be the birds, and I just started laying them out and moving them around. So for me, just as this was inspired by their true story, this is something I needed to get out and express based on my experience with Curious George. And Curious George flies a kite. So if you're inclined, I want to say to encourage you to submit. It doesn't have to be a drawing. It doesn't have to be a painting. And you don't have to worry because I'm the person that's going to be looking at the paintings and the poems and reading them. So I want to encourage you to think about something that you connect with. This story, I felt when I read the book, and like I said, they have copies for you to borrow, it was an intentional way to have people connect to what happened during the war in a way that they probably would not have connected it before. Because I know, this is a newer book. I don't know that any of my teachers would have ever taught, oh, here, we're going to read Curious George, and do you know that that's connected to escaping the war and escaping the Holocaust? That was never told, never a blatant connection, never even mentioned. So I also want to encourage you to search for those connections. Jason couldn't stay, but he's associated with WJFF and left this nice microphone for us. But there is a music promoter named Bill Graham who has passed away. But he is associated with Live Aid and the Last Waltz.
And the Fillmore East.
And the Fillmore East. He actually was a child born in Germany, and his family packed him up and sent him. He eventually came to family he did not know in New York. His name was changed. He became Bill Graham. So Jason was like, I've always wanted a reason to do some research and put together a little exhibit about Bill Graham. I said, well, there you go. Now you have a reason. The Liberty Museum and the Sullivan County Museum. So hopefully, that will come to fruition.
Passed away with Stevie Ray Vaughan, I think, in a helicopter.
Yes, in a helicopter crash.
Stevie Ray Vaughan.
And it was only a few months after he had been up here in Parksville at Arrowhead Ranch.
Yeah.
So that's like, things that we don't think about necessarily, or like, who is that and what is their connection to the Holocaust? They do. Like, I'm finding these very, wandering ways that to me are nice that people are willing to share and want to make those connections. Because I would never have found out about that.
You know who was going to be on the helicopter too, but it changed plans and stuff?
No.
Somebody named Eric Clapton.
Oh, wow. Oh, you'll have to tell Jason.
Huh?
You have to tell Jason. He had to leave, but I have his microphone on. Promise I'll give it back to him.
It's one of the few things I remember at my age.
No, but those are the kinds of things that conversations such as we're having tonight hopefully will open up, that people will say, oh, did you know? And I only know that because I know Rose, Arrowhead Ranch.
They performed together that night. The day that they performed, they were on the same day together.
Ah.
Bill Graham was on the helicopter with Stevie Ray Vaughan.
There you go. Did not know that. And I only found out about Arrowhead just since I moved up here. But Rose is like, there were a whole lot of people who were connected up there. And then she again said, we want to, so she's doing that, the Daffodil Garden in September. I think it's the 8th of September. And she's going to do, like, as part of it, a dedication to Bill Graham, because she's not done that up at Arrowhead. So
Where's the Arrowhead?
Arrowhead's in Parksville on Cooley Road. I'm pretty sure it's Cooley, not Cooley Mountain. I'm pretty sure it's Cooley Road. So if you take exit 98 off of 17, if you come off of exit 98 and just keep going there, it's maybe 2 miles off the exit. It's about 2.3 miles because we looked into doing the dove planting.
And what is it?
It's a horse ranch.
Oh,
Horse ranch and sanctuary. So she does not do horseback riding lessons. It was a concert venue, and now she's rescuing horses. I think she has horses and donkeys at this point. So yeah, you might be able to call her, and I know she gives tours, and she has acres and acres. But when she said to me, we've never done anything for Bill Graham. I own Arrowhead now. It's time. She's like, we're gonna plant the yellow daffodils. So that's that connection. And then before I turn it over, I do have some, here we go. I will put on the table out there the list of our programs so far. So we have 3 different weeks that there will be programming here. So today is more of the story part of it. On the 19th, we'll be making Snuggies of Hope. I did not name them, Mariana did, that was very sweet. Those will be actually put into suitcases after they're created. They will be put into suitcases, and they are actually going to be shared with refugees in Gaza and in Israel. And then on March 28th, we are going to watch Freedom Writers here and then have a discussion on how everybody's story is so important to tell and encourage people to do that. And then I have all the information about the Liberty Museum and then the Sullivan County Museum. And the date is September 8th, so I have the dove planting there. And I want to encourage you, if there's a story you want to tell, a picture you want to make, poem, please share it out. I did today receive an email from one of the current youth ambassadors. She wants to submit something, and was she too young to submit? And I said, absolutely not. Please, submit. And one of the students at SUNY Sullivan contacted me and said, here, can I submit 2 paintings, digital artwork that I created? I said, absolutely. So I can only speak for myself, but I'm gonna do a little connection with Peter. I think from my point of view, it is what we need, the youth, is to be that bridge, to say, you hear these stories, you are now the gardeners of this future. Please help it grow, please help it continue. And before I turn it over to Dr. Chester, I do want to say that we are collecting can tabs. So I started this project about 7 years ago, and we are trying to see if we could reach 6 million can tabs. At every event, we are collecting them, similar to like paper clips and etc. But I am going to have them unbundled. Let me rephrase that. The ones that are already counted, I'm not unstringing. As we collect more, this is why Terry gives them to me once in a while at the Rotary meetings. We have yellow ribbon. So symbolically, again, with the yellow ribbon is also like Tony Orlando and Dawn, and tie a yellow ribbon and bring them home safely. We are tying them together in bundles of 100. Eventually, they will be weighed, and then the Ronald McDonald House uses them for their patients that are there. So they have an exchange program. And lastly, we do have candles. So I know for some people, lighting a candle in memory of someone as a memorial candle, we do have these. They're not for you to take, but I will put them with the artwork so that if you feel that maybe you're creating something in memory of someone, today when you draw or paint, if you feel like you want to turn on a candle, those will be in the artwork. Without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Peter Allen Chester.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do a somewhat abbreviated version. I'd like to introduce myself. But let me preface it by saying that I'm not a medical doctor, and this was something that I had to explain to my father in 2009, a couple of months before he died. And I said to him, Pop, I got my doctorate, and as son of a survivor, among other things, I became fluent in German, French, Dutch, and Yiddish. Not so much French. My wife Joanne was a teacher and chairperson of French. And he looked at me and he said, "Was meint das?" What does that mean? I said, "Pop, I'm a doctor." I showed him. I said, "The York University." "Was meint das?" And I realized that all he was interested in was not so much the science of medicine, but the license plate on the car. Because we grew up in Manhattan, and you'd see cars with MD plates parked all over. The joke was, you go down to Bloomingdale's and you'd see the MD plates around, and the cops would say, "Wait a minute, are you the doctor or are you the doctor's wife?" It was very, very sexist in those days. Because of course the doctors were practicing medicine and making their money, and the wives were shopping in Bloomingdale's. So the story of the doctor is an interesting one. I'm a 2G, I'm a second generation. Both my parents were survivors. My father was a camp survivor. And my mother and her younger brother left Germany in 1936 on something that was called the Kindertransport. It became very obvious by as early as 1934, when the first concentration camp opened. And they were called Konzentrationslager. Lager is a German word for camp. Concentration is what the word means. It's to concentrate. And what do you concentrate on? You're working. You're working for the betterment of the government, and you're working for the Führer, Hitler. So you would concentrate on this. It was death camp. It was a labor camp. You worked until you died. Contrary to some beliefs, and my father said this to me, when he was in Auschwitz, they were a sizable number of non-Jews, a sizable number of Polish non-Jews, a sizable number of blacks because of the transport between Marseille and the northern coast of Africa. So when we look at the word Holocaust, among the 6 million were not only 6 million Jews. There was anybody that Hitler and his henchmen felt was inferior. You're inferior because you have curly hair, and you have blonde hair, and you have no hair, and you have glasses, and you have no hair, and I'm a fat old guy. And but nothing would happen to you except for the fact that you would be experimented on. You would be experimented on because look how different you are. So to spin this all around, early on I didn't quite understand what 133497 meant on my father's left forearm. Everyone else that I had interacted with up here and in school, the parents were, and this was a collection of Jews as well as non-Jews, their fathers were military veterans. This was in the late 1950s, early 1960s. But my father had 133497. He didn't have the anchor and the tattoo and all of that. And it took me a while to understand what it was until he told me his story. And his story starts off this way. 1930s, 1920s, my father was born in 1925. His older brother was born in 1918. My grandfather, his father, was a soldier in the German army during World War I. They were settled into middle-class life in Cologne, Germany, a major city. My grandfather owned a haberdashery. They lived above the haberdashery. The building still exists. When my wife and I were there a couple of years ago, I looked for it and I remembered the pictures, and there it was. So all of a sudden, German economy tanks. All of a sudden, Hitler is elected. And from 1933, 1934, 1935, there seems to be a methodical concentration to get rid of the Jews, the bald-headed ones, the purple, pink-headed ones, the ones wearing red shirts, the ones with those shoes, the ones with curly hair, the ones who did not fit into what Hitler said was the master race. Some of you may have heard of that, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired, big, stark, Sturm und Drang, storm and lightning. Things started to get very, very difficult, and my grandfather, who I often said the haberdashery was a front. He was really a pirate and a black marketeer. Because when my father told me the story, he said, you know your grandfather, he did business in Belgium and in the Netherlands, and as it turned out, he had prepared for the family to leave Cologne. 1936-ish, 1937, he was prepared, and on November 9th, in 1938,
Crystal not broken glass.
and all of a sudden, the children on the street started to see something they've never seen before in their lives. They saw bullets. They saw bullets flying, flashes of light. And they heard the breaking of the glass. So the story goes, and this was the manifest that my father and my uncle, both of whom survived, and they were never separated. This was the manifest that they wrote for Yad Vashem, and for the Holocaust Memorial Museum in New York. My father starts off by saying, "It's beyond comprehension, but I get over it." My uncle, who was a college graduate, he was 8 years older, wrote something a bit more sophisticated, and he said, I actually know it. Bei Nacht und Nebel haben wir raus Köln gegangen. By night and fog, we left Cologne. Wir haben gegangen zum Grenze von Netherlands und Belgium. We went to the border of Netherlands and Belgium. Da haben wir meine Tante gesehen. There we saw my aunt. She wasn't really the aunt. And from that point forward, the story begins. 1938, 1939. By the end of 1939, my father, his older brother Randolph, whose real name was Adolf, his younger sister by a year, Lieselotte, his mother Paula, and his father Joseph, made their way to a sleepy section of Brussels. And again, the Germans were kind of moving into the Netherlands, kind of moving in, just making their presence felt, weren't doing much of anything. Oh, except for the fact that they said, you know what, we're gonna leave you alone, but just so we know who the Jews are, you're gonna wear the yellow star. 1940, it starts to become very difficult. War in Europe started. The Nazis are scoring victory after victory. There's more broken glass. There are more bullets. The bullets are larger. And they're flying faster and faster and faster and faster. And when the Germans said, why are we wasting these bullets on the Jews? They started to take the Jews in numbers going to the millions to concentration camps that were scattered throughout Europe, from Buchenwald in Austria to Sachsenhausen in northern Germany to Auschwitz in Poland. And then little camps in between. These were Konzentrationslager. We're going to concentrate our effort. We're going to make you work for the betterment of Germany. We love you. Except for the fact that eventually we're going to either work you to death or we're going to get tired of you and we're going to not shoot you because these things were needed to kill the Americans. We're going to put you in a cleansing chamber. My father remembers and said to me, and I preface this by saying, my father did his presentation along with my uncle, I would probably say 75 times in half a dozen different countries. My wife was the former principal of Fort Hamilton High School, the largest high school in the city, second largest in the state. I was the director of a school for the gifted and talented. My father and my uncle spoke freely of this. We'll talk about that in a moment. So here we are, and it's not safe for Jews to walk the streets of Brussels. All of a sudden, my grandfather and my uncle disappeared. Where did they go? They disappeared for a month, for 2 months, and they finally came back. They were taken to Paris, which was in the process of falling. They were taken to German officers who were seeking out World War I German veterans to find out, number one, were they really veterans? Number two, were they Jewish veterans? And number three, were they loyal Germans? Were they Germans first? I don't know what my grandfather told them or what my uncle told them, but my grandfather had a way. He really knew how to weasel out of situations. I'm going to break for a moment and tell you that from the period of time of 1943 until the liberation of the camps in 1945, my grandfather evaded arrest almost 40 times. I don't know how he did it. The woman who hid him owned a bar. He was hiding in plain sight. He not to stereotype, but he looked very Jewish. His German mannerisms were very Jewish, and somehow he managed to do this. My father, to backtrack, was among the last of the Jewish boys to be bar mitzvahed in Cologne in 1935. His birthday is October 24th, and a few weeks later, they were gone. So now it's no longer safe, and they hid in a nondescript apartment on 62 Avenue Colonel Picard in Scarbeck section of Brussels, Belgium. That building still exists. And he was hidden by a woman whose name was Olio Marie de Lange. She was a widow. Her husband was murdered, a street crime. He was a taxi driver. Her daughter Lillian died of scarlet fever in 1924. So she hid the family at enormous cost, because right up there with the Nazis persecuting and murdering the Jews and those who were inferior, if a non-Jew hit a Jew, that person was tortured. But my grandmother hid them, and I say grandmother, I'll tell you why I call her that a little bit later. She hid them. In early May of 1943, the Gestapo came to that second floor apartment at 62 Avenue Colonel Picard and arrested my father, his brother, his biological mother and sister, and took them to Malinois. Okay, Malines is it's a rail yard not too far from Brussels. It was a holding place while the Germans decided who to shoot and who to take to the slave labor camps. Shortly after they arrived there, and they were there until the end of July 1943, my father and his brother were not separated, and his mother and his sister were in eye shot. Eye shot. When all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, he watched his mother and his sister being shot. He was 15 years old at the time, and he lunged towards the area, and he was hit on the head with a bottle, and he fell down to the ground, and what he saw was the black hubcap wheel cover on the Mercedes-Benz staff car with that star. They spent time from May until the end of July in Malinois, and then they were taken by train to Auschwitz, where he was tattooed with 133497, where his brother was tattooed with 133498. And they were worked and 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 worked. And an older prisoner who had been there, Schneider, the tailor, for 8 years, looked at my father, who was 15 years old, who was terrified, and said to him, Kleiner, seh mit deine Augen und hör mit deine Ohren und mach deinen Mund zu. Little one, look with your eyes, hear, and keep your mouth shut. And that's what he did. That's what he did as he watched people around him die, never separated from his brother, having to deal with seeing his mother and his young sister just executed. Some of you may have seen the dramas on television where all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, boom, boom, and blows off the smoke from the Luger and puts the Luger back. My father managed to stay alive with my uncle. They kept one another alive. My uncle was an engineer, and he realized that one of the tricks to survival was to get some type of job inside. Du, Kleiner, kannst du kochen? You little one, can you cook? Ja, ich kann. I can cook. So my father peeled potatoes, and peeled potatoes, and peeled potatoes, and peeled potatoes. He tells the story that one night they were preparing for a staff dinner, and he's peeling potatoes, and in walks a German lieutenant. Du Kleiner, was ist dein Name? You little one, what's your name? Leo, mein Herr. Leo, sir. Wie alt bist du? How old are you? Leo. Ich bin 15 Jahre alt, mein Herr. Hier ist mein Sohn, ist auch 15 Jahre alt. And the man went back in, and then he came back in. The meal was over, and he looked at his watch, and he said, Jung, 1 Minute. 1 Minute. Und dann kam ich hier rein und werde ich dich schießen. You have 1 minute. 1 minute to do what? 1 minute to take food. And 1 minute and 1 second, I will have to come in here and I will have to shoot you. Does this mean that there were only some bad Nazis? Well, my father said if every Nazi was evil and disgusting, there would be no Jews. There would be no inferiors left. So he realized that there was a way, even though for so many there wasn't. The Germans started to lose the war in 1944, late 1940, in early 1945. It was very obvious. The once brave Nazis were getting scared. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to have to prove to the enemy who may conquer us that we're good people, that these Konzentrationslager, these camps, are not death houses. We're going to have to spread them out and evacuate them. So in early 1945, my father, his brother, and the other prisoners began something called Todesmarsch nach Buchenwald, the death walk. And it was very clever in a sense, because you couldn't walk from Auschwitz, Poland to Buchenwald. This was several thousand miles. So the idea was, well, at 80 pounds, how many of these people are going to last? So they walked and they walked and they walked, and then they were put on a train, and they ate whatever looked edible in the fields. Some Russians who were captured killed a dog in the dark of night and managed to somehow light a fire, enough of a fire, to at least cook the meat so it was edible. So my father finally gets to Buchenwald with my uncle, and at that point, the Allies, and in the case of the liberation of Buchenwald, it was the 1st French Infantry, got there. The camp is liberated. You're free to go. In 1945, my father was 19 years old. He had witnessed the murder of his mother and his sister. He was taken from Brussels, and here it is 3 years later, shade under 3 years later. You're free to go. Where are you going to go? Where am I going to go? And ringing in his ears is still the sound of broken glass, is still the firing of the gun that he saw the German soldier use to murder his mother and his sister. Where are we going to go? They made their way from Buchenwald, which is in Austria, to the last place they knew was home, which was Brussels. They finally managed to go through war-torn Europe. No money. Clothing that was torn and tattered, coats that they had to take off of dead soldiers and boots along, not having bathed, not having taken medicine. My father's mouth was infected. He had open wounds. They made it to Brussels, and they went to Schaerbeek, which was the last place they knew, 62 Avenue Colonel Picard. And they went there and they walked upstairs and they looked at the door, and instead of the name Olio Marie de Lange, there was another name. They asked and they asked and they asked, and in that part of Brussels is a bilingual city, Belgium is a bilingual nation. So at that particular point, they found somebody who looked familiar. And my uncle said, "Ik weet je, wo is der Madame de Lange or der Monsieur Jojo? U bist het kleine und u bist het grote." He asked, "Where is Madame de Lange and where is Jojo?" And the person said, "You are the big one and you are the small one." Ins Brasserie Welcome. Brasserie Welcome was the bar that my grandmother, and I'll tell the reason why I call her that in a moment. Oh. So they go down to Brasserie Welcome, they walk in, and the bartender says, "Grote willkommen. Ik heb een beetje vlees voor u te essen. I have a little bit of meat for you to eat. Wo is mijn papa? Hij speelt kaarten." So my father tells the story. My uncle, who was physically much larger, goes in. Here is my grandfather, who is sitting this way at the card table. "Papa, du bist wiedergekommen, ich hab das gewusst. Und wo ist die Kleine? You came back, I knew it. Ist da, ist klein, kann nicht so schnell laufen. He's there. He can't walk that fast." My father says my grandfather never asked anything about his wife or his youngest daughter. He only said, "I knew you would be back." My mother was in England. Her parents managed to get to New York. My mother was on the kinder transport, so she didn't endure this. But what she did endure was what we now sometimes call post-traumatic stress syndrome. She and a younger brother were taken from comfortable surroundings in Trier, Germany, which is right near the French border. It was part of Alsace-Lorraine. Young ladies, a history lesson. For the longest time, there was a border conflict between Germany and France. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was born in Thionville, so he was originally French, and then the Germans took it over. So it was not unusual to have dual citizenship. My grandfather, my father's father, had, that we know of, at least 3 citizenships, but that's a story for another day. So my father and my uncle are now back in Brussels. Brussels was reasonably intact following the war. So what is he going to do? He's 20 years old. He spent his teenage years in a death camp. Well, my aunt, who was in America, my grandfather's sister, wrote him a letter and he said, "Josef, schick der Kleine nach Antwerpen, soll lernen Diamantenpolitur. Send the little one to Antwerp, which was a diamond center, and he's going to learn how to polish diamonds." They sent my father to Antwerp. My father learned how to cut diamonds. In 1947, my father, my grandfather, and my uncle wanted to leave Europe. It was enough. They wanted to come to the United States to restart their lives. My grandfather says to Olio Marie de Lange, "Please marry me." And Olio Marie de Lange says, "You owe me nothing. Go to America. And if you feel that you want me to be your wife out of love, then I will come to America and marry you." So my father went, my grandfather, my uncle, and my father went to America. They went through Ellis Island. My father had a terrible skin infection, gum infection, and He was under a doctor's care, but he was quarantined for 21 days. Now, he was just released a couple of years ago from a death camp, and once again, he's incarcerated. He said nothing. The end of 21 days, and my father was a very gregarious person, a very talkative person, like his father. He had struck up a conversation. The person there said, okay, you're fine, we've examined you, welcome to America. My father said, I'm happy to be here, I promise I will be a good American. And my uncle came, and the fellow there said, this is your brother, could you guys wait just a minute? Uh-oh. Took my father and my uncle to another room, they're filling out papers. 26 days later, my father and my uncle were naturalized American citizens. That never happens. Okay, so it shows you, those who have never dealt with bureaucracies, you can cut through them. So they're now settled in their apartment on Riverside Drive in Manhattan, and it was a very large apartment, and there were a lot of children of survivors, and my uncle, my grandfather, had this collection of half a dozen all living in the apartment and everything. My father writes in his manifest, and when I do the longer full presentation, I read from it. But he basically said, Die Witwe fliegen nach mein Vater von aller Seiten. The widows are flying towards my father from all sides. Und hier mein Bruder und ich, and even though the big argument was that I was better looking than my father. This is my father with, as I said, who is this tomato here, Pop? So, he said,
What's the picture? Because I just want to show them.
yeah, you can show them that. You can show them pictures. This is my grandmother. He's floating around here somewhere with these ladies. This is my aunt, his sister, and my father's floating around here. So my grandfather is lonely. He realizes that while this Belgian Christian woman risked her life to protect him and the family, that this is the person he wanted. He didn't want Mary, who owned the building on 57th Street with the first shop. Okay? He didn't want Hilda, who lived on Fifth Avenue. He didn't want them. So he goes back and he proposes to my grandmother, and it became my grandmother. And they were married in America, but they didn't like it here. Because they had Brasserie Welcome, the saloon in Brussels. I tell you a good story about that in a minute. So they went back to Belgium, and they lived a charmed life. They went back to tending bar. They moved from Avenue Colonel Picard to, they had this thing for moving. They moved 4 times in a year because they didn't like the color of the apartment, they didn't like the view, they didn't like the garage. So they managed to move, and all of these places were on a street in Brussels called Avenue de Croix de Fer.
About what year was that?
This was when they started moving. This was
About
in 1950s, 1960s, when I was small. I took my first trip to Brussels in 1959. 1959 on a 4-engine prop plane that had a lot of room inside. But from the time we left, it was called Idlewild Airport at the time.
Oh, yeah.
From the time we left Idlewild Airport until we got to Zaventem, Belgium, which was the airport, I listened to for 12 and a half hours. Now couple that with, there was a lot of room though, and the food was not bad, and the flight was pretty smooth, except for the fact that we were in this closed cabin with poor air conditioning, poor air circulation, and smoking was a big thing, and you could smoke on airplanes, and they had this little device above the seat that would suck up the smoke.
Yeah.
So, but nonetheless, it didn't matter. So after we finally landed at Zaventem, and I was a little kid, and my grandfather came with what looked like this antique car. It was a 1953 Opel, that was this nondescript, something that you would see in the old movies. And that was my first trip there. I've been back many times, both when I was single and both with my wife. So my grandfather married Olio Marie de Lange at the Hotel Olcott in Manhattan on 72nd Street. And they went back to Brussels, and they lived a wonderful life there until my grandfather went to sleep in 1972 and didn't wake up. And my grandmother went to sleep in 1982 and didn't wake up. Here's what gets rough. My grandmother, like all my life, was for me, aside from my wife, the most magnificent woman, magnificent person I've ever met in my life. She didn't think she was anything special. When I was a frightened young boy in that apartment in Brussels in 1963, and what Europeans do, at 11 o'clock all the street lights go out. Every light goes out and they pull down these shutters, so you're sitting essentially in complete darkness. And I was terrified, and my grandmother, who was a very devout Catholic, brought me an illuminated crucifix. I later learned that in those days, the illuminated crucifixes, like the watch dials, had uranium in them, so the good nature was poisoning me. And she would bring it to me and put it on my bed, and she said to me, Monica, Herr Gott Jesus is mit u. Schlaf gute. Monica, there's a statue in Belgium called the Monica Piss. It's a statue of a little boy who had to go to the bathroom in the street. And he stood in the corner and he basically just went to the bathroom in the street. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't the first one. So they made a statue of the Monica Piss. They put it in the street corner where he did this. And of course, there's water coming out of where he pees from. And if you really like it, what's interesting, the whole thing is about so big. If you go across the street, you can buy your own replica that's bigger than the real thing.
They come in chocolate.
And they come, yes, and you can actually buy the chocolate Monica Piss. It's and they have the Christmas ones. This is really crazy. So a word of affection that Belgian nationals would call, the way we as Jews call mamala, Belgians would call you Monica after the Monica Piss. And she gave this to me, and this was just a simple act. On Friday nights, my grandmother cooked a very traditional Friday night Shabbos dinner. She made a very good chulent, and Saturday afternoon, my grandfather came back from synagogue, and Sunday morning, my grandfather would drive my grandmother to the cathedral. She would only go to the Latin Mass of the cathedral. And I remember once going with her, and I'm saying to myself, gee, this is strange things are going on here. Here she's going in, and there's this long line to get the host, to get the communion, and she's walking up, and all of a sudden, out of one of these hidden things, those who've been in churches, synagogues have them too, they're like these hidden doors that are behind the altar. So out comes, this old guy, dressed, and I said, well, this is the Archbishop. So my grandmother would only take the host from the highest ranking official in the church. Well, this was the Grand Cathedral of Brussels. That was the Archbishop. And I said to myself, how the hell did she do this? So my father said to me, well, it's like this. Thursday night was card night, and your grandfather somehow managed to get into a card game along with the Archbishop, and he brought good schnapps for the priests and the nuns, and again, I tell the story when Joanna and I first got married. One of my side jobs, nice job for a nice Jewish boy, was carrying the beer up to the top of the nuns' residence in Bensonhurst. So he would bribe. So I said to myself, so he bribed the Archbishop. He got him drunk. He brought good cigars. He got the nuns drunk, with the understanding that when Grandmama would walk up for communion, he would come out of a hidden room and give him away. And just to make it look good, he would say, "Okay, you take one too." And then he would hobble on back. And my grandmother knew this. She knew that he had done this because she was his partner in crime, and she would, when my grandfather died, she actually decided that she wore black for the rest of her life and had no need for any jewelry, save but for a crucifix. Very simple life. There was no reason to, she had her hair done, but she didn't have it colored. It was just her way. And she decided she couldn't live in the house in Brussels. They had a very, very nice house in Brussels. She couldn't live there anymore. So my father and my uncle put her in this wonderful senior care facility in Belgium, and then she found out what it cost, and we got a telephone call, and this was in 1979, 1980, that Grandma is no longer in Laeken. She is in Zottegem, which was her hometown in North Flanders, and she is an OLV te Veldbloemen, our mother of Flowers of the Field, which was a Catholic-run, very Spartan home because she was eating. So I went there once with my father, and of course, in the family tradition, how do you get special treatment? You find out what the priests and the nuns drink and what they smoke, and he does the same thing. And my grandmother, who was just like him, they were exactly alike, looks at my father and says, Kleiner, she would call my father the little one, and Grote, my uncle, big one, Kleiner, het Wieger, gib ihm nicht the teure Schnaps, give him the kleine Schnaps. Don't give this guy the expensive liquor. Give him the cheap stuff. And I'm sitting here and saying to myself, this is like reality TV. This is insane. I go back and I say, after my grandfather died in 1972, I was a student at NYU, and I had rearranged my schedule, so I finally died in May. So my schedule was that I had some time off and I wanted to go visit her. So I went there and I was ready to transfer and finish my senior year in Brussels. We got along so wonderfully, and you got to remember, she went to sleep at 7 o'clock at night, except for Wednesdays when she watched Bonanza, which was an old western that was dubbed in Flemish. So if you can imagine, your Cartwright's, hey, grote horse, gehen die Städte in kaufen in Beche rope. Go in the city and buy some rope. This is all dubbed in Flemish. So, we had a wonderful time, and my grandmother said to me about 4 or 5 days into the visit, she said to me, u bist een jonger man, ik ben een oude vrouw. Es ist niet geduldig dat u zit met mir den ganzen Tag. You're a young man, I'm an old lady, it's not necessary for you to sit with me the whole day. And I said, okay. And she said, u moest nemen het Fräulein van Onkel Randolph, ihr Freund, raus en dan het tweede Mal gehen mit de anderen Fräulein. You have to take your uncle's friend's daughter out one time, and then you can go out with the other one. So, as it turned out, I did that, and then as I'm going out, she pressed my clothing and everything like that. And among other things, my father said to me once before I went there, he said to me, listen to me. You do not lift a hand, you leave your dirty laundry at the side of the bed, you do not make your bed, you do not do anything, you will insult her, don't do it. I said, she's my grandmother, she's not my slave. So I was speaking being a prince, my underwear was ironed, I had linen and everything. So I'm on the way out, and she tugs me and says, Peterkin, wird nicht ein gutes Zeit haben heute Abend, aber morgen in bessere Zeit. Peterkin, the kin is a diminutive in Dutch. You're not going to have as good a time tonight as you'll have tomorrow. So I go out, I take this young lady out, as I shake her hand, thank you, it was very, very nice. And I think the whole date lasted an hour and 20 minutes. Okay, so I come home, and my grandmother, of course, is asleep because it's not Wednesday night. Now, Wednesday night, I go out with the other girl, and Wednesday night, I come home just about at the end of Bonanza. It must have been about 9:45, and I walk in, and my grandmother looks at me and she winked a little bit. I said, bessere Zeit gehabt. Ja, Monica, you had a better time tonight. and I'm saying to myself, I said, grow my base. So I had that kind of relationship, and to bring it all to closure, and then just a general comment. My grandmother was the kind of person who, what you see is what you get. She didn't marry him because she didn't want to marry somebody who was grateful to her for doing what she felt she had an obligation to do as a good Christian. That was her obligation. She couldn't turn these people away. So she felt that was an obligation, and in return expecting nothing else. So when she said, you go to America, and if you love me, you marry me out of love, not out of gratitude. So they led a charmed life for 25 years. My father and my uncle came to America to restart their lives, and they did. My father lived to be 84 and died in 2009. My mother, 93. In 2016, my grandfather, Joe, was 75 when he died, and my grandmother was, I think, 83. Because when she was born, around 1899, there was some question with birth certificates because there were no hospitals at that time. There were midwives, much like you had up here at the western end of the county. So, a couple of things. My father always talked freely about it. He liked to watch war movies and he liked to watch Hogan's Heroes. And when he enjoyed success through hard work, doing something he had no interest in doing at all. He was a diamond cutter. And he had no interest in doing this, but the reason for doing it is because Tante Frida, my Aunt Frida, who was my grandfather's sister who was in America, said that the kleine kann $400 de machen in Woche. The little one can make $400 a week. This was in 1948. Wow, $400 a week in 1948. So by the end of the fourth week, he had a '48 Buick Roadmaster convertible. So he was working 20-hour days, but so he became successful. My uncle became successful. They met their wives. My mother and father met on a blind date. My father used to like blind dates. My mother, they went on a picnic. My mother made cheese sandwiches. The only time my father ate cheese was when I married Joanne, and Italians eat cheese, and that's another side of it. So my father said to me once, "Are you going out with an Italian girl?" And I said, "Oh man, here we go." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Does she cook?" I said, "Well, Italian girls cook." "Oh, but does she cook like grandma?" My grandmother had in my grandparents' house in Brussels. You had Friday night Shabbos dinner. You had Seder for Passover. You had latkes for Hanukkah. And then you had sausage and peppers. So it was an interesting life. At the age of 75, my father bought a Mercedes-Benz. He had no problem buying German products. He had no problem going back to Germany. And he was at that point president of Congregation Ramathora, which is now the second largest modern Orthodox shul in Manhattan. He had rescued that shul. That was a synagogue founded by Holocaust survivors. And they were dying out, so he decided we're going to open this up to the next largest Jewish population in the Upper West Side, the kids from Columbia University, saying, listen, if they can pay this tuition, they can pay dues to come. So in his true sense, how did he get them there? Well, he did what he did with the priests in Brussels. He got them drunk and fed them food and gave them cigars to smoke. So when they asked him, how could you do this? And he said, listen to me. We were taken to Malinois. I saw my mother and my sister shot. I lunged, I was hit, miracle he wasn't killed right then and there, fell down, and I saw the star. He said, you see that? This is a Mercedes-Benz S420. It's the second most expensive one. I didn't get the most expensive one because I didn't like the color. I went to the dealership and I said, I want that car and we'll do a wire transfer. He said, so here I am. I sit behind the wheel and I see the star. The only difference is it's mine and the star is there. I won. I won. The German government tried to make restitution by something called Wiedergutmachung and Lebensbescheinigung. Wiedergutmachung make good again. So they would give a pittance every month. And I remember once, it was very strange. My father, who was pretty meticulous until he got old and said, it's enough, I don't need to look at it anymore. I'm just naturally beautiful. I said once to my mother, I said, Daddy looks like a pig, you can smell him over here. On the days he had to go to the German consulate in Manhattan to prove that he's still here, he wouldn't shave, he wouldn't bathe, he would put the toupee on and crooked. He'd wear terrible clothing, and he would stumble his way into the place and going in, and when he'd steal the pens and the pencils and make it out like he was this destitute poor person. And I said, Pop, he said, anything I can do, and I don't need the money. I will do what I have to do to do this. I lost my father in 1984. He lived a good life. He survived. I lost my mother in 2016. She lived a good life. She lived to see children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And I end as I began. It's not a real doctor. Was meint das? You don't have the license plate. So you have to still put money in the parking lot. And questions, comments? Yes, sir.
I have some comments, Peter. As you were talking, I wrote down a few notes, all right?
Yes,
And
sir.
note one is, as we look back in history, and when I was a young person, President Eisenhower was a conservative and so forth, but looking back in history, a great man. He was the one that
Yes.
insisted on taking films and pictures of what they found when they went into
Yes.
the concentration camps, so that people would always be able to remember. And when I was in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade in Monticello School, they would show those pictures of the bodies being bulldozed and so forth. They don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And they, for whatever reason, it's too horrible for people to see. But your talk and your speech makes this live on, and that what Hope is doing, and that's why I'm here, is just to help that in a little way that I can do that.
Thank you.
So that's first comment. Second comment, there was actually 13 million people that were slaughtered in the Holocaust, of which 6 million were Jews. And I've had
1.5 million in addition to the 6 million with children.
exactly. That's what I was going to say next. I had the good fortune, sadly, but the good fortune of going to Yad Vashem when I was in Israel. That's the Holocaust Museum, and they have a special building there that commemorates the 1.5 million children that were, and it's completely dark on the inside, and when you walk in there, there's 1.5 million little light bulbs that are still lit in memory of those children. And the last comment I want to make is, you talked about Hitler taking over France at one time. So I had the good fortune in my life of being in Paris a number of years ago, and the thing I think about in my life, I walked in front of the L'Arc de Triomphe, and there's a very famous picture of Hitler doing the Irish jig as he took over France in front of the Arc de Triomphe. And I said the same thing to myself as you had said. I think your father said, I won. I'm here as a Jew in front of the Arc de Triomphe, walking where Hitler did the Irish jig.
Yeah,
So,
that was interesting. One other comment. In 2010, my grandmother was designated as the righteous among nations by Yad Vashem, which was an honor. So she's noted there. My father's manifest and my uncle's are in Yad Vashem and in Museum in Manhattan, and also in the one in Berlin and the one in Austria as well. In 10 years or less, there'll be no survivors left.
There was just an article about that in the New York
That's
Times.
why we're here, you
Yeah,
know.
the ages now of the survivors range from, I think, 88 to 104. So it's probably going to be a lot less than that. So that story that we as 2Gs tell is very, very critical, because the phrase they use when in the book is Paris Burning, the unimaginable. Whereas my father started his narrative, it was beyond comprehension. Nobody thought that this could happen. And all of a sudden, overnight, friends became enemies. Was it brainwashing? I don't know. Was it always there? I don't know. But the bottom line is, the Holocaust that take place against the Jews was not history's only Holocaust. And
there's numerous Holocausts.
Yeah, there were lots and lots of Holocausts. Arguably, when and I don't want to get too much into politics, when Hamas slaughtered the Israelis at the settlement in October, that was a Holocaust, and what's being done in return is a Holocaust. Slavery was its own Holocaust, where people were worked to death. Because my father always made it a point of saying, we were worked to death and we were starved to death simultaneously. And when all else failed, and we were no longer of use, we would be gassed. You know, my father went back to Buchenwald on 2 occasions, and he spoke there as well. Remember once he got up and he said, you know, I mean no disrespect, but this place is too clean. You need to get one of the air wicks that has the scent of death. If you're going to go into the crematoria, you've got to have the human ashes and some bones strewn around that we forgot to sweep up.
It's interesting that he says that, because this past summer, about a month before we went on our first family vacation, we were going to Prague. And my cousin calls, oh, where are you going? You know, make sure someone in the family has your itinerary, blah, blah, blah. And I tell her, you know, we're going to Prague. And she said, well, she had just found out, so my cousin just turned 75, so she was 74. And she said, Hope, I just found out that my great-grandmother was in a concentration camp at Terezin. And I said, what do you mean? Like your entire life, like you never knew? And she said, my grandfather never talked about his parents. My grandfather was here, and their generation, some of them didn't talk about it. And I said, so how'd you find out? And she said, someone did one of those ancestry searches and got in touch with her. And it was like, knew so much that they verified it was legitimate. And she said, my great-grandmother and her sister were sent to Terezin, this concentration camp. And Terezinstadt, and she said, her grandfather had come over to the United States before that, and then wound up staying, had never saw his mother alive again. And she said, I know this is your vacation, but do you think you're going to go to Terezin? And I said, well, now absolutely, absolutely we're going to go. I can tell you that had I not known that, I think my experience there would have been very different. And as Peter was saying about the crematorium, so you go to Terezinstadt, and it is as if it is frozen in time. I don't want to say it's dirty, but it's not like a tourist attraction. It's not like if you've ever been to Williamsburg and it's a recreation of something. It's just as if there were people there and then there weren't. They don't have mannequins, like there's nothing that was recreated. And so we went, and it's in 2 parts. There's like a bigger area and a smaller area, and we went to both. And I went to the archivist and I said, this is all I know is her name. Can you tell me anything? And we do hear about in history how like the Germans and the Nazis and the people kept meticulous records. They absolutely did. The archivist was able to find her name, to unfortunately tell me the exact day she was number 19 in the line for the crematorium, had the whole list, had the time, and he said, the crematorium still stands. And I was like, I felt frozen in time. I'm like, absolutely, I couldn't go. I could not bring myself there. But what I did do is, as he said, here's the building she was in, it still stands. You cannot go in it, but you can stand outside of it. So I went outside, stood there. My son came over, who's a good 5 inches, I would say, taller than me. He could see over, and he, took some pictures, because I needed to bring something back to my cousins. And as we were walking, it was like all pebbles and stone. And I bent down and picked up a handful, because I thought I need to bring something back. Do I know if she walked on these steps? In my mind, I want to say yes, like this is something. So I do want to say, like you're saying, like there needed to be something. For me, when I was there, it literally was just a place frozen in time. People there that are very solemn. And the other reason I want to mention it to some of the people is this is an older version of the book. I've never seen another butterfly. There is a new one. They do have it here. And it is poetry and then art, because there was an artist amongst the adults who was in this concentration camp. And this poetry and the artwork was hidden for years, and it was found after the camp was liberated and created into this book. And one of the things that they are going to do with one of the art teachers is for the exhibit in Liberty, she is having her students read the poems but not look at the illustrations. Mm-hmm. They are going to make their own. And then she's going to do a triptych of the poetry, what the current students in 2024, what it has them create, and then the original art. And that is going to be on display at the Liberty Museum and then at the Sullivan County Museum. And then, and also when he was saying about people that are forgotten, there is this book, I don't know if they have it here, but it is available, The Forgotten Victims, the disabled victims, the people who like now we would call marginalized, or they're on the spectrum, or people that have diseases. You know, between 1939 and 1945, as he said, like if we're not looked upon as being someone who could contribute, then we don't have a need for you and we will let you perish. So there are some books available, and you know, videos and things should you wish to learn more. And go ahead, Michelle, and I'm just gonna I will put these on the back table, and then after he answers a few questions, we'll wrap up, and we have just a few minutes for the art room, but I'll put this on the outside table in case anyone wants to take it of the exhibit.
Just one last thing before I take your questions. Sometimes you hear the phrase, "Where are your papers?" Here it is. Here's my grandfather's. This is my grandfather. I have the star. I can't take it out. Well, Lisa has. I have the star. It was my grandfather's star. I can't take it out because that's even though I speak it freely, that was kind of rough. Let me take your question.
I have a question with regard to the tattooed number. Does that mean there were 133,000 who came before? I mean, was the numbering, what did the number signify?
No one is quite sure whether it was a count of anything other than, okay, you know, where did we leave off yesterday?
Okay.
Because it was interesting because my father said, first of all, you know, everybody from doing that, it was done with the equivalent of a branding iron, and they would dump a little bit of cold water on top of it, and that was the end of it. And if you got any kind of infection, my father says, you know, there was a German doctor who was one of the prisoners, and he would have the other prisoners, pardon me if you haven't eaten yet, urinate on it because something had disease. So they were branded. It was not a tattoo. It was a branding. The numbers, there are lots of, you know, some people say yes, you know, it is an actual count. Others say it conflicts with, as Hope had said, the Germans kept scrupulous records. Some of the work, and Elie Wiesel talked about this not in Beggar in Jerusalem, in one of the other books. In Night he talks about it. What they used to do with the artwork and everything, the bunks were wooden, and you know they would pick away at the wood and they would hollow out the wood on the blind side of the bunk where it attached to the other slat, and they would hide the artwork. They would hide the artwork in there, and then they would make a mark. They would almost like a secret code. They would make a mark so that if they didn't survive, or if someone else would come there, that person would know where the artwork was. In some cases, the written work, and the writing was done with stone, with gravel, with anything that they could find to do this. I mean, a lot of it, you know, was you talk about, you know, skills to survive out in the wilderness. They developed skills to survive in a death camp, you know. So and as for talking about it, he talked about it. You know, he had this infatuation with Hogan's Heroes and war movies, and he did not have the nightmares. We have a friend of ours, a friend of mine who went to school with me, who said my father doesn't sleep at night and it's frightening. So when you read about, you know, the nightmares and the tremors and everything, the 2 Gs that my generation, we experienced that with our parents, that they would have nightmares. My mother not. My mother was nice and comfy in England. I mean, the biggest fear was the lights would go out during the air raids. And
Michelle, you mentioned that about the number. So there's a person that did to go along with what he is saying and how it was put on. She did a short documentary, and she is going to come. It's about a person who has a number, but at the end of her life, she wants the number removed because she doesn't want to die being a number. She wants to be a person again. So she is going to share the documentary, screen it for us during one of our programs, and then do a talk back about it. So if you follow, when you put out all the schedule, I'll make sure I put it on there. And
There is a part of, among the 2G groups, one of them is a tattoo group where some 2Gs have the number tattooed. They do it on the shoulder, and it's very elaborate with the Star of David and the number. I toyed with it every so often, but an old friend of mine who was a professional wrestler once said to me, "This will accomplish exactly what?" And he himself was a survivor himself.
My grandfather was one of 8, and only 2 survived, and they escaped. My grandfather and my grandmother escaped from Hungary to Cuba to Miami. And I grew up going to Jewish day school, so I've met a dozen survivors probably, but I'm afraid that my children won't. So that's one reason we're here tonight, is because they need to hear these accounts and these stories. And my grandfather never spoke about. In my family, it wasn't really spoken about. So there's a loss. There's a lot of loss.
Yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge all the untold stories.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is only the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you very much.
One, I want to say thank you, but to follow up what the gentleman said and what you're saying, I'm not Jewish, I'm a cradle Catholic.
But you heard a story, very nice.
Yeah, and I grew up in Rockland, so I met a lot of Holocaust survivors. And my granddaughter won't come because I made her come to Temple Sinai when she was 15. She met a Holocaust survivor, and because they don't teach it in school, and on social media, it never happened, we're making it up. And she was telling me these things. And this is her friend Annie, and I brought Annie. I was hoping a Holocaust survivor would be here so she could, because this is the last generation that will see them. And we must remember.
So we do have a Holocaust survivor, and she's like, "Hope I just can't come in person and do it." She said, "You can come." I think Jamie and I are probably going to go see her. She's like, "You can come to my home. You can ask me questions." I just not up to it today, and I had to respect.
Oh no,
I was like,
Sure.
that is you lived it. Although we want to respect you and hear it, we are going to have a Holocaust survivor speak. If you can come to Livingston Manor, May 6th, I think it is Monday, May 6th at 9:00 outside. We're doing we're having 2 survivors of the Holocaust tour.
And when you speak of the concentration camp, my nephew is stationed around the world. He's making a career out of it. I get pictures from everywhere. When he got stationed in Germany, and he goes to Poland, he speaks Polish with his girlfriend is Poland. I said, "You must go to Auschwitz." I got no pictures, and he told me, "Anthony, you have to come, and then you can describe it."
Yeah, pictures don't describe.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know that your grandfather talked about it and your father talked about it, and I know so many people that didn't talk about it and wouldn't share it with their children or their grandchildren. My family was that way. They wouldn't share any of that history. I had no idea until I was in 2nd grade, and somebody threw a penny at me and called me a dirty Jew. And I had a 2nd grade teacher who gave me the Diary of Anne Frank, and it started a lifelong learning and wanting to teach my friends and family that there's no denying that it happened. It actually happened.
I mean, my father's, when I say scars, my father had some scars. He was inordinately fearful of authority or people he perceived as being authority figures. And all things considered, he also, and this was a point of contention that estranged my sister and myself, when my sister said, "Well, Daddy is a liar." And I said, "No, Daddy tells the person in front of him what he feels that person wants to hear." And it went back to the point I made about the SS guy coming in when he was cooking in the kitchen. Ja, mein Herr, nein, mein Herr, danke, mein Herr. And that was the only scar. I've embraced it more than any of my sister, her daughters, her son, more so than anyone else on both sides of the family. The camp survivors are on my father's side of the family. My mother's side of the family were either kindertransport or they came to America when you could get here just having a sponsor in the early to mid 1930s. But so many don't talk about it, and they hide it from their children, and it's almost like there's this vow that you make. My cousin Pamela, my father's brother's, it's not that she denies it, it's that, well, it's of no concern, and the memories are not good ones. And I said to myself, I said, every time I talk to you, I become a bigger idiot than the last time I talked to you. Your father's a survivor, you have a legacy here. No one's saying relive it, you don't want to relive it. It's not like, you don't want to watch a monster movie because you're going to have nightmares, but it's such a critical part of history. And it expands to so many other ethnicities who were affected by this. Yes, sir.
I think the two words "never again" says it all. We've got to make sure, whether it's to the Jews or anybody else, that it's never again.
That never happens.
And that's why purposely, like in doing this project, so it's taking place here and there'll be 2 more sessions here, and then at the Liberty Museum and Art Center, and it is incorporating art and it is incorporating music, so that never again, that awareness can be very broad. So that people are not, okay, you're holding this in a synagogue, I'm not Jewish, so I'm not going there to hear these stories. It's like, no, let's do this in an art museum. You can express through art, you can express through poetry. We have a few people who identify as LGBTQ. One is a child of a survivor, one wrote a book about a person who was in one of the concentration camps. We have a recipe book, this one here, no, that's fine. That for each recipe, there's a story of survivor that goes with the recipe. So we are very much taking the approach of this is an awareness because these stories, these are people and they need to be continued to be told. We are officially, I just want to thank people, but we are officially out of our clock time. But I do want to thank Chelsea and Mary Page and Mariana, and Dr. Chester for being here tonight.
But it's not a real doctor.
Yeah, I have the same one that you do. It's okay. It's a real. We paid that price by all those classes that we took. I do want to encourage you, if you know someone who is a survivor, a child of a survivor of the Holocaust or another humanitarian crisis. I had somebody whose parents were survivors of the Armenian genocide. She is going to speak at one of the sessions. So please, I'll give you my contact information, or it's out there. Please have them reach out. Also, if you know anyone that would like to sponsor one of the sessions or make a donation, we do have a nonprofit set up for it. And finally, the schedules are out there if you want to take one, or you can also, it's on hopescompass.org. Again, we will be visiting the museum in September, in Hurleyville. In May, we will be in Liberty. And if you feel that you want to contribute something, either artwork, poetry, or monetary, please reach out to me. And there are some supplies in the other room. I know we don't have the time probably to make something today, but if you would like to come back at one of the other sessions, please do. And thank you, Les, to you and Jessica for helping behind the scenes with everything.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.